now we can get started for real. Take 3. Okay, welcome to CS Dungeon. We'll be walking through this assignment, so by the end of the live stream, you will feel good about getting started. Okay, so you can find the assignment at this top section here. It's no longer assignment 1, it's assignment 2. You can also just find it on the main page if you scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see this cute little picture here. And the theme of this assignment is a dungeon crawler. So if you haven't heard of that, don't worry. Basically, we are creating a linked list of dungeons because this assignment is about linked list. And each dungeon is connected to another dungeon. So you will be playing as a player traversing through these different dungeons. And in each of these dungeons, you will find some monsters, you'll find some items, and you'll get to eventually find the final boss at the very last dungeon. So that's the basic brief, and hopefully you have some fun with it as well. So this assignment is about linked lists, and those have been covered in last week's lectures as well as this week's lectures, so make sure you watch those. They will be very helpful to get started with this assignment, and you'll find a lot of the same topics being directly reflected as well. In addition to that, the week 8, so this week, tutorials and labs will be also very helpful. Especially this week's tutorial, we'll be doing a multifile activity, which will be helpful for this assignment, which is also multifile. And there will be plenty of linked list exercises in the problem sets as well. So make sure you watch your lectures and go to your tutorial and lab this week. Okay. So next bit, this is for 1911 students. So if you are taking COMP1511, you only need to do stage 1 and stage 2 to get the performance component of your mark. You still need to do style, you still need to have good style to get the remaining 20%, but you only need to attempt stage 1 and 2. If you are a COMP1511 student, you need to attempt, well, you don't need to attempt all stages, but you will be assessed on all 4 stages. And you also will still be marked on style, and style, that's the same sort of marking scheme as assignment 1. So make sure if you're not sure how you went on style for that, talk to your tutor and they can give you some advice on how to improve your style there. Okay, assignment structure. So just to take a pause for a second here. We have all of these little tabs on the side. So as you can see, there's a lot of sections. Don't worry, we will walk through all of them and we will point out all the important bits as well. You can also access all the different sub-stage and stage tabs as well. So assignment structure, we will be using linked lists, and we will specifically be dealing with a list of struct dungeons, and each struct dungeon can also contain a list of struct items. So that's our 2 sets of lists there. We have multiple structs in this assignment. Don't worry about all of them right now. Each stage will make it clear which structs you will need to use. And we have a little drop down here that describes each of these different structs. So the important ones for stage 1 is going to be struct map. So this one, it just contains the information about the map. So it will contain the first dungeon in the list of dungeons, so your head dungeon effectively, your head struct node. And it also tells us some extra information which you can read about in the header file, which we will get to in a second as well. Struct dungeon, so again, this is what our core linked list will be made up of, each of these struct dungeons. And then struct items as well will be making up a list. Struct player, that is going to contain all the details about the actual player playing the game, like their name, health points, things like that. So you will find out all of that information at the appropriate stage as well. Struct boss, this one we will deal with in like stage 1.4, I think. We'll talk about that in a second as well, but this is basically just all the information about the final boss that you can encounter at the last dungeon in your list of dungeons. Okay, we also have some enums as well, so they are in the header file in csdungeon.h, and these are just the different types of monsters and the different types of items that you can encounter. Okay, so, getting started. So we recommend, making a folder for your assignment, and then when you want to grab your files, we recommend using the fetch command, so 1511 fetch activity CS dungeon. This will copy, csdungeon.c because this is multifile. I will talk about that a bit more in just a second, so bear with me. But this will copy the implementation file and it will link the other two files, main.c and csdungeon.h. And by link, I mean it links it to the actual version that we have. So that means that if we make any changes to it, it will change for you as well. And it means you cannot change these files, which is good. You should not change these files. So I very much just recommend downloading the code with this file here. If you are not on CSE and you would rather download it otherwise, then you probably just need to fetch it from CSE and then copy the code across to like your own system. But yeah, recommend just doing it like this to save yourself the hassle. If we do make any changes, you will find them all in the change log at the very bottom of this, and I will show that at the end. Any major changes, if needed, we would announce it so everyone will be made aware. Make sure to run autotest to make sure you've got the correct file. When you do run autotest, it will not pass because you haven't changed anything yet, of course. Okay, so now we can actually talk about the actual starter code, and I will fetch that as well. So you may have heard me say, oh, main.c, csdungeon.h, and be like, oh, what's all of that? So let's have a look at what I'm actually talking about. Sorry, not the auto test. I'm going to grab the fetch and grab that starter code for us. So, oops, sorry, spoilers. So I'm going to make an assignment2 directory, and I'm going to cd into it, and now I'm going to run that fetch command. Okay, and you see we say copy link link just to show that's what's happening. I'll do a quick ls, and there's all my files. So now I will open them all. Let's have a look. Wait a second. Okay. Yes, I trust these. Okay, so here are our 3 files. Let's go over them. You don't have to worry, multi-files is not scary. It's just a couple extra files just to sort things out, and it also will make things easier for you in some ways as well. So don't be scared, it's all right. Okay, so main.c, this is our main file, and this one you don't have to read it all. You don't even have to open it, and you'll be totally fine going about your assignment like that. Although if you would like to read it, you totally can as well. So this is where the actual main function is. So if we scroll down here, here is our main function. And then we have just some other different functions to help us parse the inputs, scan stuff in. So all scanning is done for you in this main file. And we also help run the command loop and stuff like that. So I won't really talk about this too much since you don't need to know about it, but if you are interested, feel free to have a read. If you find anything confusing, then just let us know on the forum or ask a tutor or anything like that. So now we'll go to the header file. Here, this header file, so this contains all the prototypes for functions that you will be implementing yourself. It also contains some constants that both main.c and csdungeon.c might need. It also contains, if we scroll down a bit more, it also contains the enums, so they are defined here, so you cannot change these, but they exist here, so feel free to have a read and see what they look like. It also contains the struct map, because again, both main.c and csdungeon.c need to know what the struct map looks like. And then looking at the struct map in more detail now, we can see it has the name of our map, it has the entrance dungeon, so this is effectively our head dungeon to the list of struct dungeons. It also contains a pointer to the player, so it has stores all the information about the player, and also has a win sorry about that. Also has a win requirement, which is not important until stage 3, so you can work. Don't worry about that for now. And down here is where we have all of our function prototypes that we have defined for you. And all of these prototypes, you will need to implement the functions in the implementation file .c, csdungeon.c over here. So whenever you do need to go and implement a function, I recommend coming and reading the comment for that corresponding function in csdungeon.h. It should have all the information that you need here. So it'll tell you about the parameters, what it needs to return, and what that function actually does. So you can see they're all here like this. And then if you need more information, the specification will have like clarifications and things like that. But definitely refer to this as well. And yeah, there's nothing really else going on in here. It's just a whole bunch of prototypes and comments really. So nothing too crazy again. The main file that we care about, and that you care about particularly, is csdungeon.c. This is the only file that you will be writing code in. Do not change main.c and do not change csdungeon.h, because we will only be accepting your csdungeon.c submission, which means when we test your code, we will be comparing it to the actual version of main.c and csdungeon.h that you downloaded, that we have. We don't know what changes you've made to those files, so do not change them. If you do actually fetch the code with 1511 fetch activity, it won't even let you change these files. If I go here and I say, oh, I want this to be a double, oh, it will let me change it. No, it won't. It won't let me change it because when I try to save it with Control S or File Save, you can see here, failed to save main.c, you don't have the permissions to do so. That was close, no, you can't actually change it. So it won't even let you change it, so don't even bother trying. You can only change this file here. So if I go down here and I say, over here, my name is Olivia, and I save that, it saved. So there's our change. So this is the file that you care about the most. So of course you need to fill in, your header, comment, things like that. So let's walk through this file as well. We've already got some hash includes for you here. Anything else, feel free to add them down there. Your constants, hash defines, enums as well. And the rest of the structs are in csdungeon.c. So the reason we put them here is so that if you would like to make any changes to these structs, you totally can. So if you want to add some more information to your struct dungeon, feel free to do so. You can just add like another little field over here if you would like to. But here are all the provided ones. We've got comments explaining what each of these fields represent. So make sure to have a read of these as well. We might come back to this later. Okay, so yeah, struct item is there as well, struct player, and struct boss. So there are all the structs apart from struct map, which is defined in csdungeon.c. If you want to create your own structs, feel free to do that as well. Just pop them over there. And here are some prototypes. So I did say that all the prototypes of the functions you will be implementing are in csdungeon.h. That is true, except for a couple of functions, these ones here. So these functions, we have had put the prototypes here so that if you need to change any of the not change the struct fields, add to the struct fields, don't remove any, just add to them if you would like to. You can change the prototype to add more fields if you'd like, and also because you will be the ones calling these functions. So coming back to main.c just for a second, like I said, we handle all of these inputs for you, like we will do all the scanning. We will also do all of the calling of your functions. So you can see here don't have to worry about how this works, but I have these functions like do append dungeon. This means we will go and call your version of append dungeon, which if I go down to over here, basically we will call this function when it is appropriate to do so. So when the player says, I would like to append a dungeon, we will go and call this function for you. So with the exception of these two functions, you will need to call them yourself when appropriate. So when you need to create a dungeon, you should call this create dungeon function. Okay, so continuing on, most of the functions, or all of the functions to implement will be listed here like this, where you have the function stub, where we've just given you like the bare bones of what the function should look like. Do not change any of the return types or parameters because this is what these parameters and return types is what main.c is expecting these functions to have. So you need to make sure that the types are the same there, so do not change those. Leave them as they are, but of course the functions themselves, feel free to just get rid of this comment, printf and exit, replace those, and then you can just type away, start writing your code like that. So yeah, remove these once you have started writing your actual function, otherwise your function will not work and will not pass the auto test, of course. And then here, so there are function comments for those create functions, just because they weren't defined in csdungeon.h, so the comments for those are in csdungeon.c. And as you can see, there are a whole bunch of functions for you guys to implement. So that's basically what this assignment is. You will be writing code in this file and you will be implementing all of these functions. And of course, you should still be writing your own functions. So just because we have provided these function stubs for you, they will not be enough. Like, you will still need to write more functions to make sure your code is efficient, and you're not just chucking everything all into this one function, minimizing repeated code. So make sure you still do write your own functions, and you can place them in these sections here that we've specified for you. And then make sure you have a prototype still. You can add your prototypes. There's somewhere up here. Yeah, you can add them up here. So you still have your prototypes as well. And I think that's all I wanted to say for csdungeon.c. Okay. Last thing about Multifile as well that I want to talk about is compiling it. So if we go back to our terminal, let's say I'm ready to test my code and I want to compile it. So you can do it as normal, dcc, and usually you'll just give it the C file. So if I say, not linklist.c, what am I doing? csdungeon.c. You also just need to provide the main file as well. So dcc, csdungeon.c, main.c, and then you can do the -o and then csdungeon like that, and then compile it, and there it is. So if I run this as it is, it's not going to totally work because we haven't implemented things yet. So if I give it a name like Faerun, 25 points, create map not yet implemented. So this is what you will see, and hopefully as you write more functions, your program will work more and more. So yeah, that's Multifile. That's what the starter code looks like, and we might come back to it a bit more as well as we look at the different stages. Okay. Starter code, and there's a little bit, you can read these paragraphs as well if you're still confused and want another explanation. Feel free to have a read of those. Yeah, so please read the function comments in csdungeon.h, they will be helpful. Do not change those return types or parameter types or amount, anything like that. Make sure those stay the same in csdungeon.c. You just need to make sure those functions that we provided, they need to still be the same as csdungeon.h. Okay, compiling, and now reference implementation. Okay, so we have a reference implementation, same as the assignment 1. So this will be helpful, of course, to test any cases that you've been thinking about and just to see what your program should be doing. So I do recommend having a play around with the reference solution. So we have some example usage and example game here as well. So to run it, you just do this command, 1511 csdungeon. So let's go back and do that. 1511 csdungeon. Cool, and you can see it's already quite similar to the provided one, but if I go a little bit further, if I say Faerun 25, and we can already see that we don't get this message popped up because this is our solution code and it has the whole program, of course. So I'll give a player a name Minsk, and I'll pick fighter type. So this is what the general setup will look like, where you create the name of your map, set how many points you need to win the game, effectively, player name, and you pick a class. So we have fighter or wizard, which is nice and fun. So you just pick one of those, and now we're in the setup phase. So the game, or CS Dungeon, will look like, I guess this is a pre-setup phase where we're setting up some extra information for the struct map. And then the actual setup phase is where we will add dungeons to our struct map. So we will add a whole bunch of dungeons, set up our little dungeon crawler, add some items, and that sort of thing, so that after that we can have our player traverse through these dungeons and fight some monsters and stuff like that. So I'm going to add some dungeons. So actually, before I do that, if you're running the reference solution and you haven't even read the whole assignment, you might be like, oh, what can I even do? So we have this like little built-in already question mark command to show you what type of things you can do. So you can see they're all listed here. So if you ever get confused, just put the little question mark in and you can see what else you can do. So I'm going to append a dungeon, and it's going to be called Castle, and it's going to have a monster type. So for monster type, this just needs to refer to the enum value of one of the monsters. So we can go back and check that again. So in csdungeon.h, we have our enums. Let's scroll back up, go back down here. So here are our different monsters. You just need to give it either 1 for slime, 2, 3, 4, and it will interpret that to be one of those monsters. So if I say 1 for slime and I say next num monsters 3, so I want 3 slimes. So there's my one dungeon. Once I'm done, if I don't want to do anything else, I can just press Q to quit, like to exit the setup stage, like that. And the last thing you need to do is tell the program what item the player needs to defeat the final boss. So don't worry about this too much. This doesn't, again, really come up until, well, this doesn't really come up until stage 4. So feel free to just not worry about it. But this just needs to refer to, again, one of these item types. And this will start from 0, whereas this we set it to start from 1. So between 0 to 4. So I'm going to say 2. And there's our setup phase, and you can see we print out what our map looks like, and there's a castle, and the boss is in this, the boss is present in this dungeon, and there's slimes. And Minsk is here, our player. And then you can do question mark again, and there's some other different commands you can do when you're playing the game. So I would recommend having a play around with the reference solution. I won't do much more here. I'm going to do Control D to end. But playing around with that reference solution will definitely help your understanding of how this assignment works and what you are expected to do. So big recommend doing that. And we have a little example game here, so feel free to add these inputs in and try and beat the game effectively, and you'll get a good understanding. Okay, next part, allowed C features. So you can use like all the C features you've been learning in this course up and until now, really, except for arrays. You can only use char arrays, so strings. They're really the only exception for arrays. To represent the list of dungeons and the list of items, you must use linked lists. Cannot use arrays. Only arrays, you can only use them for strings, linked lists to represent the dungeons and the items. So please keep that in mind. If you do not follow this advice, you will receive a 0 for performance. So very much keep that in mind, use linked lists. Yeah, that's this section here, so use linked lists. Okay, we have a FAQ, so this is quite similar to assignment 1, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so you can only edit csdungeon.c, we talked about that before, but yeah, do not edit anything in main.c or csdungeon.h. Do not edit any of the parameters or names for these functions. So this is important, and you'll just it'll be annoying to go and fix later. So make sure you just, from the start, don't edit those. Just write the implementations for those functions, and write your own functions if you'd like as well. And yeah, check the style guide to see if you can use other features, and of course just ask your tutors as well. So also make sure if you do get stuck on your assignment, go to help sessions, ask your tutors. Like, we have so many help sessions running, and there'll be lots of great tutors there to help you with your questions. So definitely utilize those. And also start early if you can, of course, because if you start early, you'll have more time to get help, and the help sessions will not be as busy as they get later towards the due date. Okay, game structure. So we talked about this a little bit before, where there's a setup phase and a gameplay phase. Setup is where you're adding all your dungeons, adding your items, and then gameplay phase is where you're actually playing as the player, moving between different dungeons, fighting monsters, collecting items, stuff like that. And you can end the game by entering Control D, or winning the game or losing the game. So winning the game, losing the game, don't worry about it for now. That's not until stage 3. So that'll just be Control D to end the game for now. Okay, now we're finally at the task section. So there are 4 stages in this assignment, same as assignment 1. So each stage builds on the previous one. So very much recommend starting at stage 1 and then working your way up. So definitely do that. And it will get more complex as you go further in the assignment. So definitely start with stage 1 and then progress. Here we have a little note about what you can assume your program will never be given, but all of the scanning will be handled for you in main.c, so you shouldn't need to worry about this. Yeah, so that's our general overview. Now we can look at the stages a little bit more. Okay, so stage 1, this is where we will add some basic commands for both the setup and the gameplay phase, so that I think by the end of stage 1.3, double check which one, you will be able to play a very, very simple game of CS Dungeon. So 1.1, this is where you will need to implement some create functions. So if you've already had a tutorial or you watched the lectures, you'll see that often we will have a create node or a create dungeon function in this case. And that function will handle the actual memory allocation to create these struct nodes, these struct dungeons. So we have these create functions, there's 3 of them for stage 1.1, and here are those function stubs: create map, create dungeon, create player. So you will need to do complete those create functions for stage 1.1. So we don't actually have any auto tests for stage 1.1 because we can't test if it actually worked until you actually append those dungeons and do something with those structs. So instead we do actually have a, where did it go? We have an optional testing file. So I'll just come back up and talk about this a little bit more, then we'll look at the optional testing file. So we have a list of instructions for each of those. So create map, you need to do these things, create player, and so on. For create player, there's 2 different classes, and those class details are listed here. So when you create your fighter, make sure that you are following these different fields to create that fighter. And also make sure, I think we have a warning somewhere here, or maybe not. Make sure that when you are writing these create functions, that you are initializing every field inside your struct. Otherwise, it'll come up later and it will not be fun to debug. So make sure you're initializing everything. Okay, and make sure to read all these notes and stuff as well. They are helpful, so make sure you read those. And then now we can talk about this testing file. So there's no auto test, but you can actually test your code by grabbing this file and just checking if things have been initialized correctly. So we can grab this command. So let's copy that and paste that in. And you can see file successfully cloned. Fantastic, let's ls. And where is it? Here it is, CS Dungeon Stage 1 testing.z. So it should be here now. This is what this file looks like. Yeah, okay. So do not submit this. This is not for testing. The only file you will be submitting is csdungeon.c. This is just for optional testing, just to make sure you have initialized your fields correctly. So to use this, what you'll need to do we have all the structs listed for you here. So we've kind of just put everything into this one file just to make your life a little bit easier, to make sure you've set those create functions correctly. What you'll need to do is scroll down, skip all of that. Just kidding, don't skip all of that. Where did it go? Create dungeon. Okay, yeah. So you will need to add like your create functions here. So we don't really care like too much about where you put them. If you want, you can just put them all above main, because we aren't marking this code, doesn't really matter. But you can put the prototypes up here and then copy your implementations down here. So if I go to my csdungeon.c and I'll go to my create dungeon function maybe. Let's go back up here, create dungeon, there it is. So what I would do is copy my implementation, hopefully with more code than this. Go back down here and I'll paste it here. And the create dungeon function prototype is already up the top. We scroll back up, yeah, there it is, it's already there. And in this main, what basically we are doing is calling your create functions and then just printing out each of those fields to make sure they actually are initialized to some value. So if you only want to test like just the CS dungeon, just the create dungeon part, then feel free to just comment out all of this create map, create player section. You can comment out a whole section by highlighting it and then control / like that. And now it's all commented out. So feel free to do that. And then if it prints out successfully and it doesn't crash, then that's a good sign that you've done the create functions correctly. Yeah, so do not submit this. It's just for some optional testing if you're a little bit worried if you've done it correctly or not. Yeah. Okay. So that's it for 1.1 there. Yeah, so it's just some create functions. Okay. 1.2 onwards, we will have auto tests, so don't worry about any files. There'll be auto tests, as normal. So I'll give like a little brief overview of the rest of stage 1. So 1.2 is appending dungeons. So this is when we are actually adding all these dungeons to our list. And we saw when we ran that 1511 CS dungeon, I did like a castle 1.3 to add one dungeon called castle with 3 slimes. That's what you're implementing in this stage. And so have like the little command here, what it looks like. And if we scroll back to our code, for this stage, you will need to implement the append dungeon function. So over here, so you would go over here and you would get rid of this and you'd start writing your code. So you can see all of the information you need will be passed to you in these parameters. So you'll be given the map, which contains the list of dungeons. You'll be given the name of the new dungeon, you're given the monster type, and you're given how many monsters. So you should have all the information you need from the parameters. And we have some diagrams here that will hopefully be helpful. So you can see, what did I say? Oh yeah, okay. So before appending any dungeons, you will have an empty list of dungeons. There will be nothing in your map yet. So you can see here our struct map little diagram there. Entrance is null because there are no dungeons. So there's nothing to point to because there's no dungeons yet. And here's our struct player as well, but that's just our struct player. Once you add one dungeon, you can see here, entrance is no longer null, and now it points to this struct dungeon here. And you can see it's got all its fields initialized to some reasonable value. Okay, so basically appending is just adding to the end of the list. So it's like a tail insertion, adding to the end of the list. So you might find, oh, that sounds familiar to the lectures or the tutorial or the lab, and you are correct. A lot of these will be similar, just on a different scale, working with some different structs. So if you are confused, I would recommend attempting those labs first so that you can work on it on a little bit of a smaller scale without so many fields and things like that. But it is effectively the same thing. Okay, nothing really else to say there. And yeah, make sure to read these hints and notes as well. They will be helpful and they will tell you what to look at. Okay. nothing else for 1.2. Okay, 1.3. This is printing the dungeon map. So this is where we are actually printing out all of the dungeons that exist in our dungeon map. So our list of struct dungeons. So you'll often find that if something went wrong in stage 1.2 when you were appending dungeons, it might be hard to tell from the stage 1.2 auto tests. So if your stage 1.3 auto tests are failing, it may actually be that the problem is with 1.2, with how you're appending your dungeons. So they kind of go hand in hand. So if you're having trouble with one, maybe have a look at how you implemented the other as well. Yeah, so this will just print all the dungeons. So we have some examples as well, so definitely look at the examples. So you can see here, we will do print a map with multiple dungeons, and we add a whole bunch of dungeons here with the append command in our setup phase. And then still in our setup phase, we can print all the dungeons. So here's our first dungeon: sewers, desert, forest, and town. And there they all are. So that's what this is. This substage is doing. And there are some provided functions to help you print the dungeons. So you don't actually need to do all of that formatting to make sure it's the exact same as the reference yourself. We do have these provided functions to help you with that. So let's have a look at those. They are in csdungeon.c. So let's go find them. They will be at the bottom. So let's scroll all the way down. Oh, here they are. So there are a whole bunch of print functions, and these again are just to make your life a bit easier so that you don't have to make a small mistake and then, you know, it's like, oh, you were just missing a new line. It's all here for you. So we have like print map name, print basic dungeon. So this is what you'll be calling for each dungeon. You want to call this function so it prints out that one dungeon in the correct format. Make sure, of course, you provide it the fields that it needs. And you can also find the prototypes in csdungeon.h. They should be down at the bottom as well. And you can see here they are. So they're not in as much detail, but it tells you what they do. Yeah, so there's 4 functions here, but they're nothing crazy. They're literally just a bunch of printfs to make your life easier. Okay. Next part. Okay, adding the final boss. So it's actually after this stage. Once you have completed stage 1.4, you will be able to play a very basic game of CS Dungeon where you can add dungeons in your setup phase, print dungeons in your setup phase, you can add the final boss, and you can print dungeons in your gameplay phase. That's all you can do in your gameplay phase, but it's at least something. So this is the exciting part, because now you can actually play your CS Dungeon. So adding the final boss, this is just ensuring that you have a struct boss that lives in the very last dungeon in your list of dungeons. So where do we go? You will need to implement the function final boss. So again, you just go and find that function. They're all like together, like stage 1 function, stage 2 functions. So it shouldn't be too hard to find. Stage 1, where do we go? Okay. You'll see here we have final boss. This is what you need to implement. And we also have a create boss function, because you will need to do another create function to actually create this struct boss. So this will be similar to the other create functions as well. So again, same thing, make sure you are initializing all of those fields. And so you should create the boss, and you should add the final boss to the last dungeon. That's where it should be. And here are the stats to actually set up that final boss, so make sure you follow these fields so that yours is the same. There will always be at least one dungeon when you need to add the final boss, so we will check for that like in main.c, so don't worry about, oh, but what if there's no dungeons? There will be at least one dungeon by this point. Otherwise, if you haven't entered any dungeons, the program will not let you, or it will, let's check, 1511 CS Dungeon, and our name is Faerun. We'll enter 25 points. Our name is Minsk. We will be a fighter. And we're in the setup phase. So let's say I don't want to add any dungeons. I will just press Q, and you get this message, no dungeons have been added, so it just exits. So you don't need to handle that case. And that's basically it for stage 1.4. Okay, stage 1.5, this is where we will need to handle any errors. So you kind of need to go back to append dungeon and final boss and make sure that the provided name, monster type, monster amount, required item, all of these fields, make sure that they are actually valid. And if they are, you should return valid, which I will talk about. Yes, this is basically just handling any errors in those given inputs for both appending dungeons and adding the final boss. So by return, what I mean is, if I look at this final boss function here, you can see it returns an int, right? So again, you might be confused. That's when you go to csdungeon.h and you scroll up to the final boss function somewhere. Here it is, final boss. You can see final boss, well, it returns an int, and this is what it should return. So when the item here, you can see final boss takes in a required item that the player needs in their inventory. Again, this is not until later stages in order to defeat the boss. If that item is not one of the listed enum values, so they are further up in the code again, it has to be one of these, then you should return invalid item. And this is defined for you as well in csdungeon.h, just at the top. Otherwise, if it was valid, you can just return valid. So a lot of these functions will be similar, where you either return invalid item or you return valid, or invalid or valid, just to keep track of, was this function successful? If it was, then return valid, otherwise return invalid. And just double check the comment for each function to make sure you're returning the correct thing as well. Some of them are slightly different. So if I scroll back up to here, you can see here are all these like valid, invalid, and all the different types of invalid as well. So each function might have a different one. So again, make sure you refer to that comment for that function. And that's what you'll be doing for 1.5, is going back and making sure that you are returning the correct int. Up until 1.5, you can just return valid in both of those functions. But once you get to here, you need to make sure you're checking to make sure those inputs were actually valid. And last part of stage 1, I know might feel like there's a lot of sub-stages, but they are relatively small, so you should be able to complete them quite comfortably. So last stage is checking player stats. This is just a helpful way to keep track of like what your player's health is at the moment, how many points they've collected, things like that. So basically it should just print out all of the player's stats from that struct player. And this command is literally just S, and you will just need to implement one function, player stats. So again, you go and find that function in csdungeon.h, you check that comment, make sure you understand what the function should do, then you can go and find the function to implement in csdungeon.c. We also, again, have some printing helper functions so that you don't have to worry about the whole hassle of printing the correct thing. Make sure you call these as well so that you can not worry about those fine details. And that's stage 1. So once you've finished stage 1, make sure as well that after you've completed each sub-stage and you've done your own testing, your own checking, and you've done your own auto testing, make sure you auto test and give. So I would recommend running give, like here's the command give. I would recommend running give basically anytime you complete a sub-stage or more, honestly. There's no harm in running give. We will take your latest submission, so run it as many times as you want. And that's especially helpful, let's say you accidentally delete your file, you'll be able to find it again, your most recent auto test or submission, by going to the submissions tab there. So it's a good way just to keep track of all your versions as well. So run auto test, run give, run it frequently. There is no harm in doing so at all. And also, if you do run auto test and give, and you have a question on the forum, we'll be able to go and check your history and just find your code ourselves quite quickly that way as well. Yeah, so make sure, of course, as well, run 1511 style. So this will, we've improved 1511 style, so definitely recommend running that. And it'll give you, you know, a lot of tips. Make sure you listen to those tips and fix up your code in that way. But of course, it's not totally comprehensive. You still want to make sure that you're like writing good functions, repeated code, things like that. So yeah, make sure you're still doing all those other bits of style as well. Okay, let's talk a bit more about the other stages, just not as much in detail as stage 1, but we'll still talk about them. So I'm going to scroll back up to stage 2. Up here, okay, stage 2. So stage 2 gets a little bit harder, but still manageable, still a 1 dot, and we do hope that everyone most people can complete stage 1 and stage 2, and of course 1911 students, you'll be assessed only on stage 1 and stage 2. So stage 2, we have a list here of all the different things you'll be doing. So first one, inserting dungeons. This is just another way to add dungeons to the list of dungeons, but instead of just at the end, it could be anywhere in that list of dungeons. So again, this is similar to lecture content, tutorial content, lab content. Yeah, so we've got some diagrams there as well. So refer to the diagrams, refer to 151 CS Dungeon. Yeah, so not much to say there. Print current dungeon details. This will just print, instead of the whole list of dungeons, it will print the dungeon that you're currently inside. Just some extra information as well, because we don't want to overload everything in the whole, printing the whole thing. So this will print specific details about the dungeon you're currently in. And again, we do have more helper functions to do that printing. So they're listed here as well, and they're also in the same place in the starter code. 2.3, move player between dungeons. So this is where it feels like a little bit more you're getting into that sort of gameplay feel, where you can move between these different dungeons. So move left, move right, traverse through the dungeons, make your way through, and hopefully get to the end and fight that final boss. Okay, cool. Fight monsters. So this stage I will talk about a little bit more because there is a lot of text in this stage. So there is a lot of text, and that's just so that you have as much, like we're trying to give you as much information as we can so that you have all your questions answered. But I will talk about it. So fighting monsters, there are 2 ways to fight monsters. So when you want to fight a monster, you'll be fighting the monster in the dungeon you're currently in. And you can either do a physical attack or a magical attack. And this just, it alters how much damage you'll do effectively. So you will be fighting the monsters in your current dungeon. And here, so I have even like a hint here. There are a lot of rules. So it might be easier to just read this short summary, look at the diagrams, and then just get stuck into it. And then when you have questions, then come back and you can read the rules detailed version or the clarifications. So it might be easier just to read this short version, look at the diagram, and then just get stuck into it a little bit and then come back if you have more questions. So basically, each dungeon, it might have between 1 and 10 monsters of a certain type. So that is all, that will all be set up in the setup phase when you add those dungeons. So when you initiate a fight, you will attack all of the monsters. You can think of them as, there might be 3 slimes, but you can think of it as you're attacking like all the slimes at the same time, sort of thing. So let's have a look at what those slimes look like in csdungeon.h. So up here are our monsters. So this kind of explains why we started the enum values at 1. So when you want to fight a monster, the monster has as much health as its enum value. So one slime has 1 health point. A goblin has 2 health points, and so on like that. they also do as much damage as their enum value. So a slime does 1 damage, a goblin does 2 damage, and so on. So if there were three slimes in a dungeon, you would need to do 3 damage to defeat all 3 slimes, and they could do 3 damage back to you. So let's maybe look at this little diagram here, because this, I'm going to zoom in a bit. Oops, maybe too much. Okay, so I wanted to make it, no, it doesn't go much bigger. That's okay. That's too many. Okay, let's look at this one. So it might be a little bit small here. Don't worry, I'll tell you all the information that you need to see. But let's say we have our fighter here. So they're a fighter, and let's say they do 4 damage. So up here, they do 4 damage. And they want to fight 2 goblins. So to defeat those 2 goblins, well, the player will do 4 damage. The goblins have 2 health points each, so the fighter will defeat all 2 goblins. So at the end, the fighter's health stays the same because the goblins were defeated before they could fight the player. So the fighter doesn't lose any health, and all goblins were defeated, and the fighter collects 4 points because, as well as the health and the damage, the point value of each monster is also represented by their enum value. So a goblin has 2 health points, does 2 damage, and is worth 2 points. I can zoom in like that. Okay, so that's our little basic example there. So a little bit more of a detailed example is, what if we have a fighter with 3 damage fighting 4 goblins? So fighter only does 3 damage, and there's 4 goblins. So 4 times 2 is 8. So there's 8 health points for the goblins. So the player does 3 damage. So 1 goblin was defeated, but then 3 goblins will actually stay alive and continue on to exist. So basically, if the player was not able to completely defeat a monster, then you can think of that monster as recovering totally and they're ready to fight another day. So this fighter would only defeat 1 goblin, and so there would be 3 left. Then the goblins would fight back, because once you have attacked the monsters in a dungeon, from that point onwards they will attack you back, with the exception of wolves, but you can read about that in the spec. But once you have attacked the monsters, they will attack back every single turn that you are in the same dungeon as them. So now, at the end of this turn, these 3 goblins will try and deal damage to the player. So they will do, again, 2 damage each, so 2 times 3, that's 6 damage. And so they will try and do 6 damage to the fighter, to the player, but the player actually has a shield. So the shield will block how much damage the shield is worth. So here it says shield power 2, which means the goblins will try and do 6 damage, the shield blocks 2 damage, so there's 4 damage that was actually dealt to the player, so their health decreases by 4. And they collected 2 points because they only defeated 1 goblin. So that's the basic gist of how fights work in CS Dungeon. But again, if that, it might still be a little bit confusing, that's okay. Just read the short version summary, look at those diagrams, play around with the reference solution, and there's all these detailed, in more detail. If it's still confusing, feel free to have a read of this as well. I just wanted to make sure that you don't need to, there is a lot of text, so feel free to get stuck into it and not have to worry about all this wall of text. Okay, so that's, the basic gist of fighting. Hopefully it's not too confusing, and after reading that explanation, you'll be okay with it as well. And we have, a couple examples here as well, so definitely refer to those and the reference solution. And we have a list of clarifications here as well, so again, same sort of idea. Maybe try writing a bit of it first and then coming back here and making sure you can tick all of these things off. Okay, so that's fighting. So that might be the wordiest little subsection, but it's like it's still the same, same sort of 1 dot difficulty as every other stage in this section as well. So the last part of stage 2 is class powers, and this is basically if you're a fighter, you get to increase your damage permanently, and if you're a wizard, you defeat all monsters in the current dungeon, kind of like a fireball is the thematic thing there. So yeah, feel free to have a read of this, and there's a little bit less text for this substage. Okay, so I will talk very briefly now about stage 3. So stage 3, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, like a little bit more in depth with these 2D linked lists now. This is where you're adding items. So we talked about items before, but now you will need to add items so that each dungeon stores a list of items, and the player themselves can also store a list of items, and it's effectively their inventory, so whatever items they've collected along the way. So the first substage is ending the game, so this will be fun to do because that means you can actually win the game or lose the game. So yeah, that's basically that. Then stage 3.2 is when you're adding items. So this is, make sure you have a read of in what order to add the items as well, because it's not as simple as adding it to the end of the list. It's a little bit more than that, so make sure you have a read of that. Stage 3.3, collecting items. So this is collecting items. So when the player enters a dungeon, they might want to pick up an item from that dungeon and put it into their own list of items. Stage 3.4, using items. So when the player decides, I want to use this item, because some items, like if we have a look at what they actually are, physical weapon, that will increase your damage, armor will increase your shielding, health potion will increase your health points, so the player might want to do some of those things, so they might want to use some items. So using items is where you will start to be using free, so that will be talked about like in this week's lectures and in the tutorial next week. And stage 3.5, this is where you're removing whole dungeons. So when the player is traversing throughout the list of dungeons, they might like completely clear out one of the rooms, one of the dungeon rooms. So in that case, when there are no more monsters in a dungeon and there's no more items, you should remove that dungeon from the list of dungeons. So this is again freeing at this point. Also important to read this warning here. I will actually come back and talk about end turn. I'm sorry I forgot to talk about that in to when we were talking about fight. I will come back to that. But for 3.5, from this point onwards, you will need to make sure that there are no memory leaks. And you can check for that by compiling with DCC-leak check. So make sure you do that, make sure there are no leaks anywhere in your program. By the way, when you are compiling with --leak check, you also need to run your program and then actually add some dungeons, add some items, try removing them. Like try and run your program quite comprehensively, and that's the best way to check for these sorts of leak checks. Okay, so I did forget to talk about end turn, so let me talk about that one. So basically anytime the player, like when the user is going to enter a command, we will figure out what function to call for you in main.c. We'll call that function, you write that function, and the code is implemented. At the end of every single turn, so when you write a command, that's like one turn, you print out the stuff, that's all in one turn. Then by the time you get to enter command again, that's the next turn. At the end of each turn, we will call a function for you called end turn. So we call this for you, so you don't need to worry about calling it. So here is end turn. And this is just to make sure if you need to do anything at the end of each turn, you can handle all of that within this function. So it passes in the map, which will contain everything that you could need. And you should also need to, when you get to stage 3, it'll tell you you need to make sure you're returning if the game should continue or not, and here are the constants to return there. So let's find end turn over here. Here's end turn. So this you will need to implement starting from stage 2.4 to make sure that when you have attacked a dungeon's monsters, that from that point onwards, at the end of every turn, if there are still monsters there, they should try and attack the player if the player is also in that dungeon. So we will call end turn for you. And that's basically it for end turn. And it's just to help you, anything that you need to do, you can do in there. Okay, very briefly, stage 4. Stage 4 is a 3 dot, so it's like more of like the challenge part of the assignment. It's a bit more complicated. We do not expect everyone to do this, and you can very, very much get a fantastic mark without needing to do stage 4. So, it's just for, if you want that extra challenge, if you have extra time, if you're interested and you want to defeat the final boss, then you should do stage 4. So, stage 4.1 is teleportation, which is nice and fun. You get to teleport the player between dungeons. Very cool. And we have like a little diagram here, of course. Stage 4.2 is the final boss, very fitting. This is where you actually get to implement the code for the player to try and beat the final boss and win the game that way. And there's some interesting things that go on in that stage as well. I won't really talk too much about it. There's also, I think, a note up here somewhere maybe. Yeah, here's a note. Actually, everything's inside the note, so maybe we'll fix that up in a second. But just a note that if you do get up to stage 4, tutors can only give you so much help at this stage because it is like the challenge stage. So we can't really help you with like any specific bugs. All we can give you is kind of an explanation of the stage, like, this is how the stage works. But we can't actually give you too much more than that, unfortunately. It is that challenge stage. And yeah, that's all the stages. So now we just get to like the little part here. Again, remember, auto test, 1511 style, give your code often. And now we're at the assessment stage, so we're almost done. So this is pretty sure exactly the same as assignment 1. So this is an individual assignment, so make sure you are doing it. It is all your own work. You cannot work with anyone else on this assignment. If you need help, get it through the course. So we have heaps of ways to give you help. You can obviously ask your normal tutor, go to your labs, help sessions, forum. You can even go to a revision session if you feel like you want to understand those concepts again. Lectures, of course. So plenty of ways to get help. So please make sure you are doing it on your own. There is like this exception here. If you needed like a small amount of code, like general purpose code, make sure you cite it. So just have a link of where you got that from. And yeah, so please do not try and get help from anyone else. Also, like of course, if you work with anyone else, that's plagiarism. Like if you're writing similar code, things like that. Also, do not post your assignment code to the forum. We can access it through the submissions page. You don't want anyone else to try and plagiarize your work. Code synthesis tools, GitHub Copilot, don't use those. Don't use AI, none of that. It will count as plagiarism. It is not permitted, and we will find out if you do use it. So please don't use it. It could result in a 0, and of course we don't want that. If you do feel the need to go to this point where you feel like you need to use AI, or you need to ask, like if you need to go get help through different means, if you need to plagiarize, if you feel like you get to that point, please talk to us first, because we can help you, we can get you back on track, we can give you all these different resources so that you don't need to get to that point.
And to get that help, you can email cs1511@unsw.edu.au.
Yeah. So yeah, please do that first, please, please, please. And of course, we want you to learn from this assignment, and if you're using all these different things, then you're not like getting that education, that learning aspect. Yeah, so we will find out, so please do it, and let us know if you need help. Okay, so here's like more like talking about these different penalties, so make sure you do read this, and it is important, so yeah, please keep all of that in mind. Okay, a little bit lighter now. So submitting your work, again, make sure you are giving with this command here, and you're only submitting csdungeon.c. you do not need to submit any other files, just that file. That's what we will be using to test your code. Yeah, and of course, like try and get your code like compiling as well, so that you can give yourself the best chance to get those marks. Assessment scheme. This is worth 25%, so it's a little bit more than assignment 1. So yeah, it is a little bit more, but you still have a little under 3 weeks to complete this assignment, so you still have plenty of time. 80% is from performance of your code, again same as assignment 1, 20% from style. So style is important. Make sure that you are keeping style in mind as you write your code. It's a lot easier to do it from the beginning than coming back at the end. And here's the breakdown specifically for 1911 versus 1511. So if you're 1911, 1511, make sure you're checking your section. So again, 1911 is we are testing for performance of stage 1 and stage 2 only. Stage 1 to 4 is for COMP1511. We will test all of those stages. Okay, style marking rubric. This is the same as assignment 1. So make sure, I would recommend actually having a read of this, because this is what we're using to mark your style. So if you like read this, you'll know what we're looking out for, and you'll give yourself the best chance there as well. So do recommend giving that a read. And then here's, again, some more penalties to keep out for. Again, do not plagiarize, and ask us for help if you need. And then here, again, similar to the top of the code, only use linked lists for this assignment. You can only use arrays like as char arrays for strings, nothing else. Due date, it is due 15th of November at 5 p.m. So that is week 10 Friday at 5 p.m. So again, a little under 3 weeks. And the late penalty as well, just to make that clear, for each day past the due date, we will cap 5% from the ceiling. So if you submit 1 day late, so on Saturday at 5 p.m. or earlier than that, you will the maximum mark you can get is 95%. And then it decreases by 5% each day. At 5 days is the maximum. At that point, we will not be accepting any more submissions, so please keep that in mind as well. If you need, then here that is. So if you need extensions or anything like that, you will need to go through special consideration. So keep that in mind as well if you need an extension. And down here, I mentioned it very briefly. Here is the change log. So if you are concerned, you can go and check this. We have actually made a couple small changes already. So if you find out anything that's like you think is wrong, or like there's something off about the assignment, let us know. You know, we want to find out what it is. Just make a post in the course forum, and if needed, we will go and fix the problem. And I think that's it.
Yeah, that was very good. Just one more thing about the changelog is that most of the small things we won't announce because they shouldn't affect your code. But if there is something big that just happens to come up, we will make an announcement on Ed on the forum, and those are things that could potentially change your code. So make sure you check Ed regularly just to see if there's any big changes. Hopefully we've already found them all and there won't be any, but you probably won't need to look at the changelog, but you might have to look at the forum.
Yep, well said. And yeah, I think that's it. So any questions?
No? Not
Okay.
from chat. We might wait just 1 minute in case anyone has any questions before finishing. But I think that's all for the assignment.
Yeah, so yeah, hopefully, you know, you have some fun with it. And yeah, I do recommend playing with the reference solution. It's a bit more fun if you like, well, it's more fun to write the assignment if you have fun playing it. So yeah. Cool.
All right, looks like there are no questions on chat. So if you do have any, please post them on the forum and our tutors will answer you. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.